Good afternoon and welcome to today's program on using workplace to increase workforce value and reduce stress. My name is Varuni Kasawan and I am a Regional Vice President of Global and Strategic Accounts for Mohawk Group. I'm also a Board of Director for CoreNet New England. Before we get started with today's programming, I have a few announcements I'd like to make on behalf of the chapter. As this pandemic event started taking shape, your executive committee made the forward-thinking decision to continue our strong educational mission and created CRAVE, CoreNet's Real Advantage virtual education series supporting our membership's desire for continued learning. CRAVE series is a virtual roundtable discussing important, timely, and relevant topics in corporate real estate. This is brought to you by Real Advantage and Education Committee and is open to all CoreNet members. Topics that may be explored are remote working, morale management, policies, providing a safe work environment, supply chain logistics, changes to workplaces that are not in lockdown, construction and legal implications, and ergonomics technology for home office setup are some of the topics under consideration. These sessions are being conducted in lieu of and similar to the Real Advantage workshops and education events. Because of the critical information being exchanged, the corporate partners and founding circle members who fund Real Advantage have agreed to make these sessions open to all members. Once the COVID-19 crisis has passed and business as usual begins, we return to the stated levels and participation for CoreNet partners and founding circle members. CoreNet New England has a full slate of upcoming virtual events. Please check out our website and your Monday morning chapter newsletter to register. Our next program is scheduled for May 19th on Boston Scientific Strategy for Returning to Work from 10 a.m. to 11. So please register if you are interested in attending this event. Engage with us on social media and help share CoreNet New England's story through Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We'd also like to thank our sponsors for their generous support of the chapter, and without their support, we would not be able to provide our members with valuable content, such as today's presentation. And before we dive into today's presentation, please note that you can submit questions to your speakers through the Q&A box in Zoom. Mike and Kristen will read through questions at the end of their presentation. I'd also like to send out a special thank you to Amy Lalazari, Partner and Director of Client Solutions for Environments at Work, for putting this program together. And now I would like to introduce you to Dr. Michael O'Neill and Kristen Reddick. Mike leads the Global Research and North America Workplace Strategy teams for Hayworth. Hayworth is a privately owned global office furniture manufacturer. Before working in this industry, Mike was a professor of interior design and industrial engineering at the University of Wisconsin. His passion is understanding how to use workplace to reduce stress and improve well-being. He has published 3 books on this topic. Mike and his team work with clients in commercial, healthcare, and higher ed industries. His focus is on tools to help clients make better decisions on their workplace spend. And today, with the current COVID situation, we have a unique opportunity to take advantage of rethinking the workplace to protect the mental and physical health of people returning to work. Kristen is a certified interior designer and design consultant on the research team. In this role, she collaborates with the team to study and learn about topics that are important to our clients, including culture, workplace performance, and well-being. Kristen believes that learning about people, making connections, and having empathy can translate into more thoughtful design outcomes that best support the way people work. Kristen takes the insights gained through our research and develops design concepts and best practices that help our clients create effective workplaces. And now Mike and Kristen will take you through their presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to say thank you to the CoreNet New England chapter and Amy at Environments at Work. We're very glad to be here virtually with you today. So first of all, can you see the screen, the first slide?
Yes.
Okay, always good to check, you know. Okay, so a little bit about our agenda. We're going to start out kind of big picture talking about the connection between workplace decisions and the effects on your workforce. And I also want to touch on some very strong feelings that I have about the hidden stress epidemic that's coming right behind the health pandemic that we were dealing with. I want to walk through the uses of human space, which is the application we're going to share, as a decision-making tool, an evidence decision-making tool. We're going to give you a quick demo of the tool, and also going to make it available to you for 30 days to use at your own discretion. And then we're going to show you, discuss a case study on corporate incubators that Kristen has led. She'll be doing that portion of the presentation. And then at the end of our presentation, we'll have time for Q&A. However, first we're going to start with a poll. And these are two questions. And the first is, and the reason we're asking you these questions is to give you some insights as to the data that the human space application uses. It has all kinds of data in there about the workforce, their costs, the amount of time they work, but it also has work process or kind of work process type data in it. And these two questions that we're going to ask you to rate are just to give you a feel for the kind of data that's in the model. So the first one is, what's the average % of your overall workday that you spend revising your work products, like just making a revision to a paper or fixing errors or reworking your ideas? So you have 6 choices there, 6 or 7 choices. And then the second question is, what's the average amount of time you spend each workday on your key work activities? These are the things you actually got hired to do, to complete, your areas of prime responsibility, in between everything else that we do, putting out fires and things like that. So we're going to give you a few minutes to answer these questions. Don't agonize over the answers, just give us some quick information, and then we'll share it a little bit later in the presentation. So I'm not sure if I should just keep going and let people vote, or we should just wait a few minutes. Okay, we're going to end the poll and we'll keep on moving. But one thing I want to talk about, because a lot of what the analytics that we do and that I've been doing for decades have to do with looking at the impact of workplace on various workforce performance metrics, things like the speed and accuracy of work, retention rates. But more recently, about a year ago, we built in a stress predictor, partly because I had a lot of data to put it into the model, but also because I think it's very important. And unfortunately, it's becoming even more important as we start to deal with our move back into the workplace. We've conducted a grand experiment on humanity by locking millions upon hundreds of millions of people, locking them down for months at a time. We've been depriving people of the one thing that people really need to live, which is social connection, all for good reasons, of course. But all the focus as we talk to clients, as they try to create their return to work strategies, of course, is on protecting their physical health. We don't want people to get sick after they return to work. But I believe there's a much larger epidemic lurking right behind that, resulting from the trauma of the lockdown, for whether you experience stress from loneliness and isolation, or trying to be a school teacher to your children and maintain your work level, or being blocked from taking care of an elderly parent, or just the stress of trying to work remotely when you're not used to it. This is causing trauma, and in some cases it might be as severe as military veterans when they suffer from traumatic events and they have PTSD. So I believe that upon return to work, significant proportions of our work population will have negative impacts on their cognition and their work performance, retention, and things like, and perhaps could be impacting things like longer-term healthcare costs and lost workdays. It's very serious, but we also know that there are things we can do about it in the workplace. And so it's fortunate we do have this stress predictor built into the tool so that you could potentially model different scenarios in the way you configure your workplace, the way you invest in it, to make sure that you're not causing a higher stress workplace. The other issue about stress that relates directly to health is that it is known to negatively impact immunity, your resistance to infection. So that's what makes it even more important. And we also know that healthcare costs are expected, if they remain on the same trajectory, to double by the end of this decade. So we're very concerned about the stress epidemic and glad that we can make this application available to let you at least get some exposure to how to make better decisions about your workplace using the tool. We know that over the life cycle of a building, for instance, workforce compensation, that overall spend on workforce, including healthcare, is by far the single largest operating cost for organizations. One statistic suggests 90% over the life cycle of a building. And on an annual basis, it's well known to be 3/4 of the annual spend that a company makes. All this investment in human capital, in the workforce and people. But unlike other capital investments, things like enterprise software, workplace furnishings, machines, robots, things like that, those are things you own. You buy it and you expect a return on that, and you own it and you can sell it or do anything you want with it. Human capital is owned by the people, by your workforce, and that human capital can leave if they don't like the job, if they have a better opportunity or have some other issue. And that's why retention and engagement, even in today's times, are top of mind for executive leadership teams. And that's what makes the human space application so unique, is that it looks at the value of human capital. And I would argue that one way of putting a financial value on a workforce's human capital is literally the compensation that is paid. That is the value, the financial value that an organization puts on their human capital. And of course, they assume that this workforce will return a greater value than the financial number that they're putting into it, and that's the return on investment. But now, when we try to develop workplace, we really don't have a data-driven and an evidence-based approach to developing workplace. There's no data-driven way to connect the decisions we make with workplace to workforce performance outcomes or well-being. And as all of us on the call well know, creating workplace is a complicated endeavor with a lot of different voices involved. You've got the C-suite, you've got your real estate leader for larger companies, you have your HR lead, then you have different service providers, including the architect, broker, potentially, project manager, facility manager. All of these voices have different kinds of influences and points of view. So there isn't any really way to know, well, for our particular organization, how much should we emphasize the quality of the individual work points versus social and group spaces? What about training and communication on how to use the space? What about the overall user experience, including the technology facilitation of how people experience the space? What's a good space planning model? What about branding and aesthetics? These and other issues. These bullet points that I'm showing you happen to be the inputs to the human space tool that you can vary the quality of. But these and other sorts of issues make creating a successful workplace a challenging endeavor. So the human space application fundamentally is a decision-making tool. It's not intended to replace good design. It is not intended to replace having a good workplace strategy or anything. It's just giving you a database point to help make decisions on. But the idea is fundamentally is that if you can upfront make a better capital spend on your workplace, downstream in the future, you could potentially reduce future workforce operating costs. So from the capital side, if you get a better solution, it could increase the time between refreshes of the space and therefore over the years reduce your capital outlay. It can also help you make better decisions about how to optimize that spend by reducing money you may be spending on capabilities that are having a low impact on important outcomes and redirecting that to other capabilities that do matter. The other potential is to use the workplace to increase engagement essentially, but in the long term, reduce employee replacement costs and potentially increase the speed and quality of business processes. The third point is that you can use the workplace to hopefully reduce or at least make sure that your workforce isn't experiencing more stress. And stress I see as a leading indicator of future downstream healthcare costs. It's well known to affect people's physical health. We know it affects engagement. Things you can count like lost work days, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the potential to improve immunity. And finally, it can give you a financial return on investment on your capital spend on workplace on these downstream workforce outcomes, including things like retention or employee replacement costs. As I mentioned, human space lets you build a model or an estimate of 4 workforce outcomes: the annualized accuracy of work, whether it increases or decreases depending on a given model, work process time or the number of processes completed per year, retention rates, and stress levels. The first 3 can be expressed as a percentage of the annual spend on compensation. So you can get a numerical, a financial number. And the stress metric gives you a prediction of what this current workplace configuration, will this give you what percentage higher or lower than average stress will this workforce potentially experience. This data was taken, the stress data was taken from almost 50 studies where we were looking, either my team or from other published resources, we're looking at people's expression of the frequency of physical stress symptoms such as stomach ache, not being able to sleep, can't focus at work, hands shaking, things like that. So we did the best we could to make base all these on the best available published science that's out there. But the secret of this all, and I've been on this endeavor for over 10 years really, and this is the 4th generation of the software, is that it uses AI technology, it uses some machine learning technology, but also proprietary equations and analytics that I pulled from a global data set, 2 science, kind of more tech books that I've written, where I had a series of case studies, over 1 million surveys across 12 industries and 160 countries around the world. And I tried to pull the equations and create them from the very best studies that had control groups and repeated measures and exclude data that I couldn't be confident of. And there's 2 versions of the software. There's an enterprise model that's pictured on the right here. And then there's our new app, which you are going to be the first people to see because it just went live on Sunday. That's a kind of a light version that doesn't have all the capabilities, but does have some very powerful capabilities. And in terms of use cases, human space can support both real estate level decision-making and also workplace applications. So for instance, it could be used to analyze the effectiveness of a real estate portfolio, which is traditionally, of course, just what's the return on investment, the financial return on investment on the portfolio. This can give you a more holistic portfolio view by looking at the human capital benefits or valuation. It can also, within that portfolio, give you property level returns. Also on the real estate side, in terms of office space selection, it could be used, for instance, by a broker or by others to help a client understand whether they should renew their lease, how well is their space affecting them, or maybe be better to relocate and then actually do evaluations of the different relocation options by giving weight to, of course, both the financial, and also the human capital considerations. And finally, more directly to workplace, you can use it. You could walk through your space this afternoon and do a current workplace assessment with the tool. And you can also use it to very quickly do what if planning. You know, what if we take investment away from individual work points and put it towards branding the space and get some instant direction. It really is intended to be a directional tool. And it does give a lot of numbers, but it's really just intended to give you a directional tool and just one more point of information as you make your bigger decisions. Okay, so let's review the poll results. So I don't know if people can see that or if I'm supposed to do something. I'm sorry.
We can see it, Dr. Mike.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it looks like most people spend about 20% or less of their time revising their work products. Some people spend, one person at least spends more than half their time. It all depends on the job and the role. This next question was, what's the average percentage of time you spend in a typical workday on your key activities? So it looks like the majority of people get to spend over half of their time, which is good. But there is a significant plurality of people that spend less than that, get to spend less than half of their time doing work that's related to their primary responsibilities. So I wanted to give you some exposure to both of these kinds of questions, because in the full enterprise tool, you would actually put in workforce data for different job levels that relates to these two questions and a lot of other information as well. So thank you for taking that poll. Okay, so I am going to just really quickly here. Okay, I'm now sharing the application that we're going to give you, and this is a web app. It's designed to be used on a mobile device such as your smartphone or a tablet. And I'm just going to give you a quick run through of it just to give you a sense of how it works and how you get data. But it is intended to be used pretty self-explanatory, and there's videos embedded within that give you some direction, and there's also screens that share information about how to use it. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is after this session, we'll give you the website and you can go in and create an account and then you can use it. So I'm just going to log in here. So just like we work in projects all day long, Human Space lets you create a project, and I'm going to just use an existing project. So you have to name the project, you can put in the number of square feet, and you can select from one of 12 industries that the organization is within, that you're modeling the project for. The other thing it asks you for is there's 4 different broad roles of people that will be using that specific space: leaders or executives, managers, individual contributors, or administrative people. You don't have to have people in each category because you may well not. However, if you have, like for instance, in this example, we have executives. There's no executives in this particular pilot. I guess it's like a little pilot space. Once you've done that, you just click the next button, and this is kind of the fun part. You need to rate your space on these 6 capabilities of individual workspace, social and group spaces, branding and aesthetics, space planning, communication and training, and user experience. So what this means is that, just imagine yourself walking through your space later today. So we're going to click on each one, and the ratings work like this. For each of these capabilities, it's kind of a gut check. You go, how much better or worse than the average office that you have either experienced or that you have an opinion on do your individual workspaces and private offices perform? So this can range from 0, just in other words, we're just average, we're no better or worse than anything, to 100% better or up to 100% worse. And notice the screen changes from red to green, so you get a quick feedback on that. Now, if you want more information about what that means, you can click on that help button, and these are it'll tell you about the specific features you should be considering that are built into the statistical model. And if you want, I'll walk you through it. There's little videos where you get to see me. So, and you can go into those at any time to get more information. So what the system asks you to do is kind of go through, don't sweat it, kind of give a rating to each one of these overall capabilities. So then instantly, through the magic of AI, it'll show you your initial results, kind of a pass-fail for your space. So let's just click this, and it's thinking, and oh, yay, your space rocks. It looks like you passed. You're having a positive impact on some grouping of the outcomes. Now, if you want more detail, which I assume you would, you can click on Show My Results, and I'll just talk you through this. So at the very top of the model, it gives you some basic information about what you've put in this model. So in this case, we've got 29 employees. We have pre-put information in the workforce because this tool doesn't allow you to do that. So it's calculated about a $1.3 million annual compensation. And remember, that's the value of the human capital. And you may recall also, we put in that it's a 12,000 square foot space. The big picture number is the number right in the center here. What it's doing based on the speed and accuracy of work and potential retention rates, it's saying that your space rating as compared to the average office space is delivering 3.76% greater value of the work being performed with it because of the impacts of the space. That 3.76% is based on the annual value of the human capital, which is $1.3 million. So we don't write it out here, but that would be 3.75% of $1.3 million is actually the financial metric of the value, the incremental value above the average workspace that this particular example is providing. And if we go down to the bottom here, so two of the biggest impacts is that it's predicting basically a cost savings of 1.85% of your annual compensation due to better retention rates. So you're avoiding replacement costs. It's also predicting that more work gets done per year, almost 2% more. And that has a financial value as well. It's 1.8% of your annual spend. And then work accuracy, that's such a small number, it's basically flat. So, but at least you're not harming the work accuracy because you're working faster than average. So those three numbers are what roll up to that 3.76. The other really important number is the stress metric. In this case, we have a really good result because this is saying that just based on the statistical modeling, that your workforce, because of the workplace, is experiencing 4.65% lower average stress level than the average. So that's a good thing when you've got the positive kind of financial metrics, a higher retention rate, and correspondingly an almost 5% lower stress rate, which is a really good thing. The other metric at the bottom is something that we all know and love from our industry. It's a cost per square foot. And in this case, you are getting a positive $4.11 human capital impact per square foot for this 12,000 square foot example. And the beautiful thing is that you can go back into the space ratings instantly, change these numbers up, and then go back and look at the results and see how they get impacted. And that's instantly being able to do kind of a what if kind of arrangement. And the other thing is that you can gain access to the premium version. We don't even have that set up yet, but we do have the enterprise version that we'd be happy to help you with. We're also going to have a video checkup so we can do a 15-minute walkthrough with you to answer questions. You can just book a demonstration of the enterprise software, or you can follow us on LinkedIn. So just a little self-contained app. It really is primarily educational. I wouldn't recommend making any major financial decisions using it. I forgot to show you this. So if you want to know more about how are we defining benefit of human capital and impacts and stress and so forth, that's also in here. So that's really it. It's like I said, there's all kinds of tips and little information screens built into it. And the idea is, especially, I am so concerned about the stress levels. I think this could be a good way for you to get at least a very general direction of perhaps how your current or proposed workplace may be affecting employee stress, which I am passionately concerned with, I guess. And that's why in working with CoreNet, I decided to just let this go out, so you could use it and hopefully get some benefit from it. So what I'm going to do is go back to the presentation. We had a number of case studies using the tool, but we decided to do a deep dive on one just to show you how the human space tool is used in conjunction with a number of other items. But we decided to use an ongoing study and a project that we have with a large organization that is building and implementing corporate incubators. And the idea in their using and building and investing in corporate incubators is to help speed up their innovation process and perhaps to drive innovation back into their very large organization, which gets harder and harder to do as your organization grows. And so they're building this company is building these incubator spaces around the world, and we're on board with them, and we've helped them analyze 3 locations in Chicago, Guadalajara, and Stuttgart, 3 quite diverse locations, as you'll see. But their strategic business goals are to build a partnership community that integrates them, each incubator, in with their local community and corporate partners, and also leverage the local human capital of local entrepreneurs and get them involved. And as I mentioned, to foster an innovation culture, to drive the innovation back into their culture. And also to bring together their corporate people who are also located at each of their global locations and bring them into the incubators and let them experience that. And finally, to improve the value of their human capital and engagement. And if you think about startup world, if you know anything about it, startups are all about the human capital, right? They almost make a point of having crummy spaces because it's just all about the people. And we think there's a lot of opportunity to tweak little things about the workspace that they're using to increase the speed and accuracy of their work and to make sure that the key members are retained, and also to help manage stress. So it makes the startup world, that the startups that are in these incubator spaces are a perfect example of almost a pure human capital play. And I will hand this over to Kristen now, and I'll run the deck for you.
Thanks, Dr. Mike. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So yes, I was part of the team that worked on this corporate incubator project, and want to talk to you a little bit about the research methodology that we used and how it all came together at the end to influence some design implications for this particular customer. We worked with this customer for about a year, and over the course of that time, we were able to do interviews with several key members across all 3 locations. So we deployed our team members and went out into the site and spent this time doing on-site observations as well as these interviews. We also did some design exercises and workshops. So the picture that you see on the right is actually a really fun game that our team came up with called the Legible Design Game. And this is all about teaching. It's kind of a multi-purpose tool. It helps to teach about the principles of legible design, and then it also helps to gather feedback from the people that are participating in the game. So we were able to learn a lot about how the startups that are residing in these spaces, as well as the corporate members that use these spaces, feel about their space. And then we also used some data collection and analysis tools, and that included the human space tool that Dr. Mike just reviewed, and a space utilization sensor called SpaceBot. So this is an example of the human space outcomes that we got out of the 3 different locations. And like Dr. Mike talked about when he was telling you about the tool, we are able to compare to benchmark data across several different industries. So this particular industry, we use the tech benchmark data because again, these are corporate incubator spaces. They are all about the Internet of Things and developing products to get to the market as quickly as they can. So the 3 different locations, again, are Chicago, Stuttgart, and Guadalajara. And you can see here that the work accuracy, they're all relatively on par with that tech benchmark. So the benchmark is 0. Again, that's just the average across that industry. And then the work process time, we found that in Chicago, they were not quite 1% above benchmark. In Stuttgart, they were way above benchmark. So they are doing really well on their work process time. And then in Guadalajara, they were actually below the benchmark. So that to us told us that there's something about the space or perhaps the corporate culture, the incubator culture that is causing them to be slower than average. And then the last one is the retention rate. So you can see here that all 3 of the locations had a good retention rate, with the strongest being in Stuttgart. There is also some information that we have gathered about the stress level at the different locations. And we can see that the stress level in Chicago is higher than benchmark. So they are feeling more stress at 2.56% above benchmark than the average. So again, that is a key to us that, something about how the teams are working or within the space is causing them to have more stress than the average. The other thing that the full human space experience does outside of the app is to show you the top 3 most important features that you will need to focus on to get a greater return on your human capital investment. In Chicago, that it was storage of the workspace, concierge reception, access to technology. Guadalajara, again, they had that concierge and reception services, as well as some technology. And then Stuttgart, they also had optimized meeting room technology. Now, what I found really interesting about these outcomes is that as an interior designer, you can walk into a space and you can experience it and observe it and talk to the people, and you get kind of a gut feeling about some items that might be not supporting them fully. And for me, when I saw these different results across the locations, it really helped to validate some thoughts and ideas about the space and just like bolster the design as we move forward. For instance, in Chicago, they host a lot of community events, and when their space has to flex to allow this, it causes a great disruption to the members that are using the space. And they also don't have any personal storage for their stuff within their workspace or all of these tables that need to be moved around and stored when they're hosting events. So that was a big one right there for them. In Guadalajara, they really don't have a lot of meeting room technology available to them outside of a big classroom where they hold community outreach events there. So to me, that was a sign that the space needed to be more supportive of the startups that were using the space, not only the community that was coming in for these community events. And then Stuttgart, their space was really wide open and was a little confusing to understand what exactly the intended use of the space is or how you would want to flow through the space. For instance, you just step right off an elevator into the space and there's no reception or concierge or really any good wayfinding to let you know how you're supposed to flow through the space and engage. So that came up as their top 3 make intended use for spaces clear. And I'd also like to point out, which I failed to do so on the first slide, but as part of this, we also deployed a human space survey that we have. And the survey asks questions that are specific to the workplace capabilities that Dr. Mike talked about. So the user experience, training and communication, technology, social and group spaces, all of those are covered in the survey. So that information combined with the numbers about work process, retention rate, et cetera, all come together to give us this holistic picture for them. And this is an example of the space utilization data that we were able to get out of this. We used the sensors at one location in Chicago. We were able to deploy 20 sensors in 25 different spaces, and the data was gathered every minute for 3 weeks. So we ended up with over 200,000 data points. It was just insane, the amount of data that we got. So personally, this part really geeked me out, because again, it just gives you another level of validation about what you think is going on and how you can suggest improvements. For instance, we found a great, it was the inequality on how long certain spaces were used and then how many people were utilizing the spaces. And that allowed us to see that we could potentially redistribute the spaces so that they made more sense and supported the people better. And these are really cool. These are actually heat maps that show typical meetings and the nature of group technology use. So the darker blue it is, that means that the people were in those spots the longest. And so you can see how they start to interact with each other and the technology. Next slide. So we used all of this qualitative and quantitative data that we gathered in the field, but we also were doing some research in-house with our research team and our global design and innovation team, because we wanted to learn about high-performing teams and what makes them successful. So what we were able to find is that high-performing teams really need good cohesion, because they have to be interdependent on each other. That allows them to create solutions that are essentially better together and more efficient in their speed than if they were working in more siloed conditions. And in order to do this, it's important to give teams the defined territory to do their work, because this is only going to enhance their rapid teaming. And then the face-to-face promotes perceived and non-perceived communication, so you're able to read people better. So the company benefits to providing these spaces to support the teams, our ability to solve the complex problems. They unify and define the organizational culture. So what's the personality of the startups that are residing in this greater incubator space. It yields higher employee engagement. So that ties directly back to the retention metric on the human space tool. And then in the individual benefits, you're able to solve complex problems. You can expand your knowledge because you're all learning from each other in this process. It creates longer professional colleague networks. So the connections you make are likely going to be stronger and more long lasting. And then a sense of belonging and feel valued. So results of this are broader and better offerings of products and services. So that's only going to benefit the corporation that is creating these incubator spaces. So here are the 3 floor plan locations. Very, very different, even from the get-go. All the spaces just had a different flavor, a different layout. There was a lot of the local culture and vibe that were infused into each space. And so we chose to focus on 5 different space typologies and really give them some ideas of how they can approach it from a kit of spaces perspective. We wanted them to still be able to retain the local culture and what makes their each individual space unique, while at the same time giving them this kit so that members of these incubators could go to any incubator around the world and recognize it by the branding and the legibility of the space and these different space typologies. So they could literally walk in. If they were from Chicago, they could go to Stuttgart. They could walk in, see a space, understand its intended use, and be able to get right down to work. So the first space that is important for all 3 connectories was the reception concierge. So just providing that welcome zone for members, a place to check in, and really this is the first, this is the face of the incubator space that's going to portray their brand and let users know how to access the space and to use it appropriately. So visual access is really important as far as being able to have clear navigation, and then signage and graphics. Now, fortunately for them, they've got a lot of really smart people that are in these spaces developing these IONT products. So they've actually done a good job of this, of creating these really cool interactive signage elements. So that was one of our suggestions, is to make sure that that is used across the board at all their different locations. And then the IONT lab. So it was really interesting to me because you think about incubator spaces and IONT and really having this vibrant maker culture. And one of the locations did not even have a lab. It was literally a 3D printer sitting out, and that was about it. And then the other location, it was tucked back in the corner, so the intended use of the space was really not clear. So one of the things we have suggested is to make this IONT lab a real centralized place. So we want it to be able to generate the buzz and the excitement, and again, like, be really clear that this is an innovative maker culture in a really active space. And it can also serve as the transition point between public and private. So again, creating these boundaries that define the private and insulated versus public and uninsulated is going to help support these teams better. We also proposed a space that we dubbed Innovation Alley, and these could be really flexible furnishings so that teams can come in, use the space, they support these short team meetings, and also encourage cross-team collaboration and mentoring. What the goal of these incubator spaces was to bring together corporate members as well as these startups and have a mentorship and sharing of ideas. But what we heard was this wasn't always occurring. And so sometimes startups felt like they weren't fully getting the mentorship that they needed or wanted from the corporate members. So creating these spaces where the corporate members could host office hours or free walk-ups is just helping to encourage that spontaneous collaboration. And then again, the landmarks. So creating these elements that are repeatable, and so when people walk in, they can have that mental map of where they should go and how they should use the space. We also, we're talking about returning to workplace at this point. So we've begun to look at how these spaces could look different when the startups and the corporate members come back to these incubator spaces. I mean, they were very close quarters. They have to be because of the high performing aspect and how they need to work together. So now we're approaching it a little differently, and how these spaces could flex and be used to support them when they go back to the workplace. So we've just done a couple examples of how they could use some of these spaces as individual work points, or they could reconfigure to meet social distancing guidelines. So they can still have the ability to meet together face to face, but again, adhering to the distancing and helping keep everybody safe when we go back to work. And this is an example of the co-working space. So giving teams that boundary so that they can work together and have all of their artifacts. Oh, I'm getting to know. I'll wrap it up here, Kate. Thank you. Again, mobility, giving them the ability to move things around. And then here's an example of what it would look like return to work. So some of these are tactical solutions I'm sure you've all seen, using screens and then restricting occupants so they can't all be in there at once. And then lastly, just some focus spaces. So understanding that this was something that was lacking across all 3 locations. So giving these spaces, and so people will have the choice and the ability to get up and do some heads down work and noodle on these problems after they've discussed as a team is also an important element as well. And that's it for the corporate incubator. So it looks like we've got 10 minutes for some Q&A. I'm just reading through your question here. Okay, so who would enter the data into the app? Your workplace as it compared to the standard or typical workplace, of course, is based on a person's perception of their workplace, correct? So we've got a couple questions there. So Dr. Mike, do you want to take question, who would enter the data into the app?
Yeah, so the app has a little bit less, it's limited functionality. So what we did for the workforce data was we put in a very generalized set of work parameters, work style parameters, and cost parameters, and things like that for the 4 job levels. In the full application, you put that in for your population, but it just wasn't possible to do that in the app. And also the point was to try to keep it simpler. So we have kind of generic level data in there. But then the idea for putting in the workplace evaluation is that you can sit at your desk or walk around and actually do the evaluation on right on your phone by pressing those kind of square buttons that are in the app, providing your rating. So essentially, the data set that I used to create this was people's survey ratings of all these different workspace features and capabilities, and doing multiple regression predictions of those ratings and various outcomes of speed and accuracy of work, retention rates, stress, and on actually quite a few other types of variables, but the model just addresses those. So you get to do the rating, and with the app, we make it very easy for you. And it is just your best guess. Is this how much better or worse than the average workspace is your space or the space that you're rating?
And it's really intuitive. In fact, we worked with an A&D customer a couple months ago, and we sat down together on a conference call. I sat down with their director of finance and HR, and so he had all of the workforce metrics that were needed. And so we just walked through it together and entered it in the tool, and it took us about 15 minutes.
This is where you would enter the data.
Oh, okay. Those were the only questions that we had on there. If anybody else has any they'd like to type in? Okay.
Okay. So if you want to try out the app, you can create an account. If you go to your browser on your phone and you type in app.humanspacesolutions.com, it's real easy, and you can just save that as a saved website on your bookmarks. app.humanspacesolutions.com.
Great. Well, thank you. On behalf of Cornet New England, Dr. Mike and Kristen, thank you for your time today and your presentation. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We value our members' feedback, so please complete the survey once you receive it. And I hope everyone has a great day and continue to stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.